Welcome back to a very special episode of Real Ballers Read. We have my favorite guest yet, my sister, Vera Grace Menafee.
Our sister.
Oh, yeah, our sister. And she is extraordinarily talented, smart, beautiful, incredible, athletic, great writer, great acting talent, great musical talent. I could go
This
on.
could go on. Easily the coolest of the
Yes.
three of us. And we are so grateful to have you on today, Grace. Welcome onto the podcast.
Thanks, bros. Thank you.
Yeah,
This is your first podcast, right?
Yeah.
that's
My
right.
first podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But we love to start by talking to you about your journey as a reader and writer.
Well, to be honest, I think that I fell in love with movies first.
Wow.
Watching them with
Yeah.
no, I mean, just to be real, like watching them with daddy often and getting to have a relationship with him through movies. And I was just watching them constantly in middle school. And they felt like a way for me to like transport into a world and think about another person's life, and reflect on that. And so I think that when I started to come back to reading in high school, through assignments and classes, at first I think I was a little intimidated because I felt like because I was so used to watching movies, it made me like a slow reader. And so I think that reading kind of felt like something I was at odds with for a minute while first starting, because I felt like I didn't have enough practice with reading. But I think when I finally started coming back to poetry and thinking about and having thoughts of my own of what I would want to write, I immediately came back to my Angelou, and that was the first book that mommy and daddy gave me. And it was like this picture book of her poems. And it's funny now because I think my writing style is very similar to hers in terms of the peace and like the calmness in her writing.
Wow. I didn't know. Do you remember which book that was specifically?
It was like a children's collection of her poems.
What?
And it's
Yeah.
I wish I could remember the illustrator, but it was a
Yeah.
really cool like brushstroke kind of like watercolor paintings.
That is so fire. Do you still have it?
Yeah, I still have it, but I
Alright,
think it's
cool.
at home.
Wow.
Thinking about your love of films first, though, I remember you had a project in school where you had to create a movie soundtrack to a book.
Oh,
you,
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what?
Wow. How
That-
did you remember that?
Because
That's like seventh grade. That was like seventh grade. I actually did it to Fahrenheit 451.
Right.
Wow. Man.
We were assigned like a list of books to choose from. That I don't remember all the songs that I chose, but I was having a lot of fun choosing like instrumental music, and finding like creating like a score rather than like songs that would have lyrics that would play, because I was imagining it more as a movie, and so creating background music for a scene that was happening. And I had a lot of fun finding music for that. And it's funny too, because now that I'm more familiar with reading and also like movie watching, like my favorite movie, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, actually doesn't have a soundtrack, doesn't have
Really?
a score.
Wait,
Yeah,
there's no music in the movie?
there's what's so cool about it, it's like it really is like my favorite movie ever because of this.
Yeah.
Where like I love movie scores and always have, and like I have a whole playlist of like 300 songs of just movie scores because
Dang.
they're very peaceful for me to listen to while studying, and like they feel familiar and remind me of scenes from the movie that calm me down. And so when I watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I was like looking up like the soundtrack, but like couldn't really find one and then I realized there wasn't a score for the movie. All the music that plays, it happens in live time. So like unless the characters are hearing music or listening to music, you're not gonna hear it. So like all of the sounds
easy.
were, it was so cool. So like when like they're near the water, like all you hear is the ocean. But then like the ending scene, they're in like a symphony orchestra performance, and like that's like one of the only times that there's music because the characters are listening to it. And then there's another scene where there's like a group of women singing, and then that's when you hear like music, but there's no score for a movie.
That's different.
Yeah.
I still haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either,
Yeah.
actually.
Sorry to be talking about movies. I know.
Oh,
God.
no, it's a great starting point. Love that you want it to be real in that way. Um, because yeah, I mean, movies are like huge for all of us. And I think like they do a great job of like telling stories in interesting ways. I also love the scores. I didn't know that you had so much of a love for them, but like what are your favorite like movie scores?
One that definitely comes to mind is Finding Nemo.
Oh yeah.
Finding Nemo.
That's
There's
a tearjerker, right?
there's some really pretty songs. I'm pretty sure the composer is Thomas Newman,
Yeah.
and Michael Giacchino is another main composer for Pixar movies. Pretty sure he did Incredibles and Ratatouille. But yeah, Finding Nemo is really good. I really like the Silver Linings Playbook soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
The score is pretty good too. Oh my god, the Revenant score,
Oh,
really
that
good. Yeah, that one's really
sounds
good.
like two notes the whole
Yeah, it's just like, it's just like, and it's like really long pauses. It's really funny.
You
Yeah.
love that, bro. That's one of the chilliest scores.
Yeah.
Because you'll forget that there's music happening in the background. It comes
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I mean,
What a yeah.
all it's just kind of crazy. We're talking about, movies, music, and
Mhm.
books are all in
by
like,
Angelou.
yeah, deep way. And I think you see them all as very important. And I'm
Mhm.
kind of curious as to more of that connection or how you view art
Hmm.
in general.
Wow. Yeah, I think I don't know. I feel like I've definitely become someone who the word art doesn't really feel like it totally encompasses what it means, but like I also find I also find that using that word feels like the closest I can get to how I see myself like creatively in terms of like how I can express myself through music or acting or writing. And I've recently really come to love dance, and it's like my minor in college now. And I could really see, and it's interesting to like talk about movies, books, and music because I think dance is actually something even more accessible than a lot of those because it is
Mm,
coming directly from a body and person.
yeah.
Um, and so I think like movements that choreographers and dancers create are very natural, that I think they can be so like rudimentary and so like a part of a core person or someone's core, that I think that's what makes it most intimidating to people when they watch it, where they're like,
Mm.
wow, like, or when people are like, oh, I can't dance, or oh, I'm not into dance.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that people say the same thing about poetry, and they're like, oh, I'm not into poetry. I don't know how to read it. I don't understand it. But I think it's actually because it's like more of a natural expression.
Saying, there is like a certain intimacy and like vulnerability of
Yeah.
like even with writing in general, right? There is kind of like a separation from it. But when you're dancing, like people are watching your body, like and your spirit and all the emotionality, like they're watching you in your entirety, and all you're working with is
Mhm.
your body. That there's just definitely like a intimacy and vulnerability there that's different.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so like you're just saying that you are minoring in dance, but
Mhm.
when did you start like loving dancing?
Wow. That's a really good question. I did dancing in high school, but it felt more like something I would do for performances,
Mm,
or like only bring out when it was like in rehearsal. Um, but when I think it was my spring of my first year in college, I took a dance class totally by accident actually. It was taught in combination with a poetry class. And so it was a poetry of place class talking about like nature writing, and then it was a site specific dance class about dancing in the environment and in specific places. And once I started taking that class, I just learned a lot more about what I envisioned in performance. And I think it was also at a time where I was having conflicts about acting and performing in stage places and feeling like I was doing something or performing art just for other people. And I think dance allowed me to bring it back into my body and feel more like I was doing and performing
Mm.
for myself, and to figure out a higher idea and concept that I was thinking of rather than
Wow.
performing for someone else. And so yeah, I found it in college and have now just continued and have gotten really into West African dance practices through one of my professors, Miss Talise Campbell. And I'll be traveling. That's the person who's
Mm.
running and facilitating the trip to Gambia and Senegal.
Mm.
And so we'll be really integrating into the history and practices of dance in West Africa.
Okay, there's so many places that we could go right now, but I really do want to get another cute and adorable story of Vera Grace, which is that you taught yourself how to write, or not like write cursive specifically. Like you were very intentional. I remember
Oh,
about you don't remember this, Grace?
No.
Really? I remember you being in your room,
Got that from
like by yourself, quiet, just writing like
yeah.
Whoa.
VERA over and over and over again to
Yeah.
get your
Gosh,
to get your
really?
handwriting as
Yeah.
like pretty and
Mm.
like nice as possible.
Mm.
If you don't remember it, I guess it's hard for you to elaborate
No,
on
but
it.
like
But
you mean handwriting or
yes,
like
handwriting,
specifically
like
cursive?
no,
Okay.
like
Okay.
your handwriting, your
Yeah,
script,
my handwriting has had
like
evolutions.
you're right. So I think like that was just standing out to me right now because of what you're saying about how art doesn't even encompass the full meaning of the word, and you more than anybody that I know like embody art and just all of the expressions of it. And I just wanted to get writing on the table as another one of those ways where you've always taken a serious attention to detail and to the craft.
Hmm.
um, because even back then when you were teaching yourself how to write in a very specific, unique and beautiful way, you didn't even know that you were going to be a songwriter, right?
Mm.
Like later down the line. You didn't know how
Mm.
that was going to turn into other forms of like creation, but it was there, right?
Mm.
So, um, yeah, do you have anything to like say just about your story with like
Okay.
writing and yeah?
Hmm. I think something that stands out actually is my experience and time at Deerfield
Hmm.
in high school. And like we all went to the same high school, but after Miles graduated, I had the next like 3 years there. And I think that I can really remember clearly each year of high school, like the English class that I was in
Mm.
and the writing assignments that we had. And like in all of them being the only Black kid in the class. And actually since freshman year, it was freshman year through senior year, and I was the only Black kid in my English class. And I think it made me feel even more motivated to find my voice outside of how other kids were reading it, because like we would always have to workshop or share the assignment so that, the teacher could so it'd be better for the teacher to read and everything. Um, but I would be writing stuff that was really coming from the heart and was really coming from how I felt in that space. And I think that was like a part of the attention to detail where like I would be writing things. And I even had a class this past spring in college where I based my entire final essay about my experience as the only Black student in that class,
Mhm.
and how I felt that the dance teacher's approach to studying somatics and the body and connection to the environment was incredibly whitewashed and was incredibly focused on white interpretation with the environment and of the body. And it was just like a really overwhelming class where, there was a class where we were told to touch like each other's like heads as part of the activity.
Interesting.
It was
Okay.
super avant-garde, super weird, typical Oberlin earthy crunchy vibe. But I was paired with a professor and she actually like touched my hair and like I had my afro out, and it really bothered me that like she didn't think to
No.
ask. And it was this weird like assumption of like, oh, in this class you will be treated as though you have white hair because this is a part of like unveiling race or something like weird, where I
Yeah.
felt like she wasn't willing to engage with me because she was trying to prove a point about, "Oh, we're equal." But I'm like, "Actually, no, I don't want you to touch my hair though." Like like you should have asked me
So
about.
what did you do?
I mean, I wrote a 7 to 8 page essay about and I was like, "This class has been taught in an anti-Black way." And I can't remember the name of it, but it was so it really made me happy, like, thinking about it, where I was like, "Wow, this could be a whole." Like, I'm thinking about pursuing it with graduate school where it's, like, a somatic study of Blackness and just
Mm,
being in like, a Black body and perceiving the environment and different kind of approach to living in relationship to the environment that's not based around a kind of white model where it was so obvious. Like, we only had 1 book for the whole class written by a white woman, and it was just very exoticizing nature and wilderness through a weird, "Oh, I respect indigenous people, but I also, like, am not indigenous, so I'm not gonna talk about that, and don't care." And it was just, like, a really strange class, but it
right.
reminded me of times in high school where, like, I I think I started writing through Armor and, like, the quote from Audre Lorde of, like, "Poetry is not a luxury," and that whole essay was about how she was saying poetry doesn't come from privileged people who have free time to write. It's not about privilege, it's not about having the privilege to write. It's about survival and not allowing other people to write your story for you, and oftentimes in the classes that I've been in, it feels like I'm asked to hold my tongue on discomfort or mistreatment, and because of how it makes other kids feel or how it makes the white kids feel specifically. And so I think through writing, I found a way to really get under that and why people were expecting that of me. And I remember my sophomore year in high school, I had written a poem based on Langston Hughes' poem I Too.
Mhm.
And it was a really important poem for me, and I read it aloud, and you remember, like, the declamations in high school?
What?
So I read it for the declamation finals, and I ended up crying, like, during my reading of it, and, like, my, like, old roommate came up to me, like, after and was like, "Wow, that was so believable," and was like, "Good job on, like, crying and, like, making that tear come out." And it was just really the icing on the cake where I was like, "You're really not understanding that this is, like, a real experience for me." I had read a line about, like, walking down a street and feeling like there was an invisible bullet aimed at my back, where I was just like, this is around the time of, like, after Trayvon Martin and
Yeah.
after Eric Garner, and a year later, someone who I'll never forget, Nia Wilson, she had been murdered in Northern California by just a random white guy on the street,
Mhm.
or actually on the train station. And, like, he also assaulted her sister, and, like, she was 19 and it was my junior year. And to think, like, how close we were in age, like, that shit was real for me.
Mhm.
And, like, but I would be around kids who would be talking about dresses or the latest clothes or latest fads. And so, yeah, I think I'm just, like, speaking in a very kind of cyclical way of trying to describe that, like, writing for me was just a way to survive the experiences that I was in and the
Mhm.
environment I was in, and a way to create the world I envisioned for myself and not the one that students or teachers were expecting of me.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah.
so real. I mean, first of all, like, you reminded me that I need to get your entire Google Drive portfolio, everything you've ever written, and just like read all of it. Because
No, seriously.
because I have somewhere in this vicinity, I have your flow and crash
Oh,
meditation from your
yeah.
senior year about your relationship to water. And not only was I like choking up and crying when I read that, but I've had it in my backpack for literally like
Wow.
years printed out, constantly like rereading it, thinking about it. It is entirely inspired like, my own reflection and writing on like my relationship to water and the environment.
Mm.
Um, and that's only like one thing of all the things you've ever like written and really like thought about. Um, so yeah, thanks for reminding me about that. But I did have another question for you around how you've talked about Maya Angelou, you've talked about Audre Lorde just
Mhm.
now. There
Yeah.
are some other people that I'd love to bring into this conversation by asking you, like, who do you feel like you belong to, right? Like in terms of your
Wow.
community,
Mhm.
um, given that so much of your experience as you're describing is being around folks that you like don't necessarily
Mm.
jibe with, but you know, are in the process of creating for yourself, but who do you think has already been there, like inspiring you, informing like who you see yourself as and what you believe in?
And people that I've met.
Oh yeah, people you met or read or anything,
Mm.
interacted with.
Wow. That is a really good and big question. I think I think someone who I'm who's always in the front of my mind, um, is actually Grandma Vera,
Hmm.
and I really don't think I've felt a connection to her until, like, after graduating high school and, like, the pandemic, and I think that was when the interview with her was first found, and
Yeah.
when I was first able to watch it and felt like she was a presence in my life,
Mm.
and, like, watching that video, I was like, "Wow, like, I've always felt you here,"
Hmm.
and, yeah, it's just, like, crazy to think how long it took me to feel that she was there, but I really like, when our mom or dad will be like, "You are protected," I really think it's because of her.
Mm.
I just really feel like there's, like, something connecting me to her
Mm.
through, like, through our name, and also, like, hearing the way that mommy loves her and the things we have in common are things that remind, uh remind her of me, and,
Yeah.
I remember when I was presenting on my so funny to, like I was gonna say presenting my research, it's so
Yeah.
funny that we're talking about so much,
Right.
but, when I was presenting my research one time, I have her interview as part of my presentation, and
Hmm.
I had a technical difficulty, and so I was, like, trying to press play, and at that point, the audience was really engaged and was really excited to hear about this interview, and they were like, "No, take your time." And it was a conference for HBCUs, and so it was a really welcoming space, and and I heard someone from the audience be like, "Wow, you look just like her." And, like,
Wow.
hearing that, it just felt so grounding, and, yeah, kind of thinking back to the thing I said of writing being my armor, where, like, now I really genuinely feel like she's kind of my armor now, where it's like, she really is protecting me, and I feel like by connecting my purpose and plan in life to what I feel coming from her, like, I
Hmm.
feel like I have places and people and things I need to do in my life that anytime I'm worried something will happen, like, I know that what will need to happen will because of her. But yeah, I really feel connected to her. It's really fascinating, and I just find a lot of strength in her life and, like, what she's passed down to us and to mommy, and knowing that everything that, like, our parents have given to us, like, came from her and her husband, and for daddy's side, like, his parents,
Hmm.
and being connected to a line of ancestry that I can tangibly see and, like, feel is really important to me. So that's definitely someone I, like, always has to pay homage to and is part of my process of being intentional in relation and remembering that we exist because of the people before us.
Yeah, that's super deep. I mean, for context, would you mind
Yeah, I
just like, well,
will.
no, just about like, because I remember like when we were like naming you, like I remember being in the hospital, like in Chicago, like you Chicago hospital, thinking about names. We were like, oh, can we name her Eeyore? You know what I'm saying?
Winnie.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, could you just share more context on just your alignment with our grandma for your name,
Mm,
your own relationship to your name, and and as well the video, right? Like,
Mhm.
what was it about the video?
Yeah.
Because then
Thank you.
once we lay out the context, then we can
Thank
start
you.
talking about
Yeah.
your research more.
Mhm.
Yeah. So our grandmother from mom's side,
Hmm.
her name is Vera Ellis, and Ellis was her married name actually. And so her maiden name was Clayton, and she passed away before I was born.
Hmm.
Um, but was still alive. How'd you met her? Do you
Yeah,
remember?
so I had met her and been around her, but I don't remember. I have no
Right,
memories of her.
right.
And then our mom was actually just telling us a few months ago at our retreat that she had told, like, Grandma Vera had told our mom that she was feeling like she was going to pass away soon,
Hmm.
and our mom was like, "I'm pregnant with Miles,"
Mm.
and then Grandma Vera was like, "All right, I'll wait," and then literally lived to hold
Yeah,
Miles, and then passed away soon after.
yeah,
But I have no recollection of
yeah.
interacting with her.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
so true of like
yeah.
the with memory.
Hmm.
Memory is really fascinating. Where you can be around someone but not remember. I think
Right.
that's what's fascinating about my relationship to her because
Mm.
she passed away before I was born, so I
Hmm.
never met her in like person or physically.
Hmm.
But I think that by sharing her name,
Mm.
I felt like she was living on through me. And I think that was it's always interesting to me to think back to how our mom couldn't say my name for like the first few years of my life. She would
Hmm.
always call me Grace, not Vera.
Yeah.
And because that was what she called her mom. And so having that memory for her was very heavy for her. And it's definitely something I've seen grow in our relationship. Um,
Mm.
I think because I can't imagine that it's not something or like that it's something that she doesn't think about. Um, but I think that that our name has like taken a new meaning for her because I have it now.
Hmm.
And like we even have other little cousins who are named Vera and like
Yeah.
um and it's really sweet. And so
Yeah.
seeing the way that like everyone in our family like says such amazing things about Grandma Vera in terms
Hmm.
of the role that she played in their lives. Um and so yeah, like feeling like I had that piece of a literal legacy through my name
Mm.
was something I just kind of learned to grow into as I got older. And then having the interview um be finally found, and it was part of the Washington University in St. Louis, like one of their research archival programs about Great Migration.
Yeah.
And so they were interviewing Grandma Vera to learn about her experience growing up on a sharecropping farm and her relationship with her dad and her mom. And her dad actually, Cleveland Clayton, he was one
Mm.
of the members of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union,
Mm.
which was the first multiracial workers union for the most part in the South, based
Mm.
on tenant farmers and sharecroppers who were asking for better conditions and wages for their work. I'm trying to think what else was in the question.
Oh, no, that's all great
Yeah,
context. I was
yeah,
just gonna
just
say
the
that,
video.
you mentioned, presenting your research at the HBCU conference, right? You were invited to go there. Basically, they paid your way,
They
right?
did pay
Because
my
you had
way.
already presented it, and then they were
Yes.
like, "Oh, come do it for
Yeah,
us." Yeah,
I had to
right,
apply
so
on my
what's the
abstract, yeah.
yeah, but then so what's the story with your research? And then
Mhm.
that'll help fold in the video specifically.
Mm.
Yeah. So I started working at an urban farm in Cleveland, Ohio called Bell's Purple Oasis, and it was founded by a community elder there, Vel Scott, and I kind of just started working as an intern there, developing curriculum and helping to, like write up PDFs or different pamphlets and kind of outreach materials. And from there, something really sparked in me around food security and memories of growing up in Dayton and just being surrounded by liquor stores, gas stations, and Dollar Trees. And
Mhm.
like, and then the one Kroger grocery store that was nearby, like, we wouldn't go there because like things would be happening there that like were not safe.
Things are escalating real
Yeah,
quick.
like, here on the news, there's like a stabbing and like this like the one grocery store within like at least 2 or 3 miles. Um, and so those memories just really started rushing back when I started working at Vels and seeing the work that she was doing and leading to create a way of maintaining some sense of food security for people in the community and providing fresh produce and an alternative way of eating instead of like fast food or gas station convenience food. Um, and so after working there, I just really felt this connection between farming and creating food security for Black communities across the country. And I think the idea started from there. And so I wanted to kind of create a way to interview Miss Vell on her experience and like relationship with farming to gain an understanding of how this can be spread throughout other urban centers in the country. And so it went through a lot of processes of applying to get approved by the college to conduct interviews. Um, and I got approved in May of this year and was able to conduct 3 interviews over the summer. And with all Black women elders who are from the area of Northeast Ohio, who are all engaged in farming and gardening. And from my idea that sprouted from working at Vels, like it's really grown into a like a way to study and reflect and analyze what Black farming and agriculture has looked like and what it can look like. Um, and yeah, it reminds me of something, Jen, that we've talked about before of farmers being carriers of time, where they have this deep and spiritual relationship with land and time that is based upon like harvest and planting and knowing when the soil needs like time to rest,
Mhm.
that I think it could really unlock a way towards not only achieving food security and a way to like provide food for people who need a steady source of food, but also as a way to create a path for liberation from high key white supremacist paradigms of time and structures and principles that are based upon extraction, exploitation, exhaustion, and
Mhm.
overworking
Mhm.
that I think farming, and in particular the practices that came from West African indigenous traditions and that were then shared and blended with Native American people upon like during the period of enslavement, those traditions I think are much closer to what liberation could look like for Black people.
Every answer is just
I know. Moment
in
of
awe.
silence.
Dang. So tell me a little more about how you approached that topic because
Mm,
based on how you're talking about it and how I know you just operate as a person doesn't seem to mesh well with my experiences of academia or
Mm.
and I think Oberlin's great and is probably a lot different than Stanford in a lot of ways. But how did you change your approach to the research given
Mm.
the subject matter?
That's a really good
Mhm.
question. I also just want to say I appreciate this space to talk about this with y'all. Like,
Yeah.
this is helping me think through a lot of experiences that I've had.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of like how I got here and why I am this way and why I am who I am.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I just wanted to like show gratitude
Oh,
for
no, you're welcome.
these are like these are
This is like
No,
deepest
we was
podcast
saying,
there.
I was
No,
saying.
seriously.
aw. But yeah, like to that question of how I approach my research
Mm.
and then my relationship with academia, um, it actually I think it ties back to a question you had earlier of the ways that I connect to art and like express myself in all these different mediums where the part that I wanted or something I meant to say when in answering that was that I feel that all of the different expressions and mediums that I use and want to learn are all a part of me and feel like they already exist in like how I show up in the world.
Mm.
So they feel accessible once I open up to them. And so I think that with with my approach to research,
Mm.
I'm constantly looking for ways to like pull back to the okay, let me settle in and think about
Mm.
what's my instinctual way of approaching this.
Mm.
And I think that I was really in conflict with that at first because right, like I immediately wanted to do the interview
Right.
and honor the work that's being done by people like Bill Scott in Cleveland and was so excited to analyze it. But then, I have to do the paperwork and application
Mhm.
for the Institutional Review Board to approve for me to do research with people. And that was like that really challenged the way that I saw research and the way that I saw curiosity and exploration, where I was like, wow, here's this thing I want to explore, but that's making it there's something that historically
Mm.
has been ruined by academic research
Mm.
because of like historical ways that minority groups were taken advantage of through academic modes of research. And so that's why the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is there. But all of a sudden I was like, but I was feeling like that doesn't apply to me though, because this is my community. These are the people who I grew up with and know. And so I felt like I really had to reflect on my intentions for my project. And
Mm.
and I still go back and forth about it with research in general through academic institutions where it's like, is there a way to do this without it becoming like extractive or without it becoming not
Mm.
reciprocal
Mm.
because of, oh, I need to like write a paper for the Mellon Foundation by the end of this semester. Like, oh,
Right.
I need to meet these deadlines. And now it's forcing me to rush a community partnership.
Mm.
And that's when having a mentor like my professor, Jay Fiskio, who works in the environmental studies department, and early on in my project, she was my first mentor, and she said, like, I was saying how I was like, oh, I need to make sure I have all of this ready for the application and have to make sure that I have this partnership ready, and it just was so stressed about creating the right community partners that she was able to really ground me and was just like, this project is on its own timeline and it's not confined to your 4 years at Oberlin,
Mm.
and you, like, don't have to approach it in a way where it's like, "Oh, when I graduate, it's done," and or like, "Oh, when I graduate, I don't have to be thinking about this anymore."
Mm.
Where, like, my approach to the research is very, like, bringing it into how can I apply this and continue to apply this? How can this be sustainable after I graduate? How can I maintain these relationships and be consistently reminding and making my community partners feel that they're valued in my project? And I think a lot of it has to do with working from a place of envisioning the world that I want to see rather than constructing my project around the trauma or the harm that was caused in history. And to shout out another author in this moment who's helping me to articulate this, I listened to an interview with Adrienne Marie Brown where she was saying that like when she's organizing and when she's in organizing spaces, she feels that it's most important to organize around the dreams and visions that the group has for the future, not the reactionary or like the hatred for how the present is. And so like not connecting yourself to someone based on the things that you hate about the world, but connecting with someone based on what you want for the world and like organizing based off of a futurist perspective. And so through my research, I really am trying to center a way of not connecting with Black people or Black farmers based off of sharecropping or enslavement, right? Or the history and the trauma that holds, but connecting based off of the practices that have been passed down and the power of community organizing that has been laid by ancestors like Fannie Lou Hamer and people like Leah Penniman working now, and analyzing and like really studying the vision and future that they hold. And so I think it's really about like a shifting and recentering, but more so like a returning to of like what it means to be Black and also be in relationship with the environment. But yeah, I think with my relationship to research and academia, it's really a struggle. And I still kind of sometimes feel that it's not the just way of pursuing change, in my opinion, where I think a lot about like with the approach of research-based art or artistic expressions and pieces that are based in research, but end in community-based art pieces. I find those to be much more reflective of what community reciprocity looks like, because it's not based around academic timelines or getting tenure or getting published. And I think that can sometimes take the forefront with academic research, where I'm constantly having to remind myself and ground myself because of the environment that academia creates. Yeah. Thank you for that question, though. That was really helpful to reflect on.
So, you just vocalized something that I had been noticing this whole time that you've been talking around the importance of returning and seeing how much of the future for us, for our collective well-being as Black people, is in the past, or can be, the seeds of it can be found, and the practices can be found through the past. And because end of the day, right, like all of those things that we inherit from our ancestors are very much present right now, right? Like it's not like they're just gone. They're very much in our bodies, they're in our relationships, also sometimes in books, but even more of it is just kind of like out there for all of us. But you were just saying the importance of returning, and I'm curious to hear more about like where your study abroad to like Southern and West Africa fits into that, right? Because you're literally fresh off a study abroad to Namibia
Yeah.
and South Africa, and you did do some other traveling as well.
Wow.
But you're fresh off of that, so could you just share more about where your relationship to the continent fits into that idea of return and Black agricultural practices? Um, just before you even left, right? So then we can do like a kind of before, during, and after of that experience
Before
before you went to
Yeah.
on your study abroad. Like, what were you bringing with you on that trip?
that was a really full circle.
Yeah,
Whew,
Crazy question.
yeah, you didn't.
got the
Yeah,
wind knocked out of me
yeah,
a
I
bit.
know. You
Um,
didn't know how we were gonna bring it in,
wow.
but you led us right there. You let us do it. Great. You played yourself.
Wow. Whew. Wow. Returning to is definitely an interesting concept to bring up in that question.
Mhm.
And it really was like stark before and after with going to Namibia to live there for the next 3 months, 3.5 months, and then coming back now to the United States.
Mhm.
And it's something I'm still piecing together day by day. I got here Saturday and
That's right. That was like 2 days ago.
and so yeah, I know, right? And so I know, because what is time, yo?
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it's a really complicated question. And it's something I really have been, I feel like in a lot of my research and relationship with academia, it's very focused on the individual and it's very focused on what do I think about this? What do I have to say about this? What's my opinion on this?
Mhm.
And I think that something I really learned from being abroad as well is that this conversation and the answer to this question and my process of the returning to for African Americans and people who are living in Africa, where it has to be a collective and community response and vision for what that means, where I'm still thinking through. I think that I did have that feeling of, oh, I'm returning to where my family came from when
Mhm.
I was going there.
Mhm.
And yet when I got there, um, there's definitely more of a wall up between, oh, you're American, so you're not black, or like you're not like us. And I think that really had to make me face like what my expectation was,
Mhm.
like what does returning to mean? And I think it was definitely a growing and telling experience of like, I don't know, just kind of that as connected as I feel to the continent and to African cultures, that's not my home. And returning, like the concept of returning there, I think is very, in some ways, distant. Where I think that for people who live there now, like they very much so disagree with that idea for African Americans. They're like, no, you're not from here. You're not like us. And so, yeah, that's just kind of how I'm processing it so far
Mhm.
from being away and returning. But it gets even more complicated in the States where even I've been reflecting a lot about the culture and relationship between African American students and African students at Oberlin,
Mm.
where there's a lot of tension there that's unaddressed and that goes ignored. Um, and I think that it has to do with being at a PWI
Yep.
where it feels like we have to agree on everything and have to be by each other's side on things. But then a lot of the African students who speak up and who are part of like boards and who are part of like Black Student Union, like, often critique African American students for taking up a lot of space in terms of what the Black community receives from Oberlin, and really, like, feeling like African American students' needs and wants are prioritized over theirs.
Mm.
And it's like really fascinating to have that, know that that's happening there, and to want to be doing more to help with closing that gap and not making it feel that African American students are taking up the most space in the conversation about what Blackness is or what is best for the Black community in the US. And I think it was fascinating upon arriving in Namibia where it felt more like, uh, it just felt like I couldn't be, like, it felt like there was a harder time. I felt like I had a harder time being able to find the connections between African Americans and people in Namibia and South Africa because they're just so different. And I actually found a lot more connection historically and spiritually of connection with land between Namibians and the various ethnic groups that are in Namibia and the experiences of indigenous peoples upon colonial settlement
Hmm.
in like America.
Hmm. Yeah.
And there's much more connection there
Yeah, definitely.
compared to the history of African Americans and African diaspora culture that was created through the violence of enslavement. And so it was really fascinating to be able to live in Namibia and start to, I really wanted to go to learn about, I really was interested in learning about agriculture. And I think as much as it felt like, yes, there was this assumption or expectation of I'm returning to somewhere that I was supposed to be, that kind of feeling. There was also, I definitely was aware and was able to acknowledge from the beginning that it's not the same, like I don't have the same experience.
Hmm.
And so I really was coming in just wanting to learn about the presence and history of agriculture and farming and how that impacted culture. And it's so amazing like how much there is to like learn about for specifically Namibia. And it's a place that most Americans haven't heard of. Most people don't know. Every time I would like tell someone I was studying away, they'd usually be like, "Oh, in South Africa." And I'm like, "No, it's actually a different country that like is no longer part of South Africa."
Hmm.
And but it used to be. And so just all of these different things coming together through what I learned there. And with agriculture specifically, it was really fascinating because I still felt that connection with farming. Like it felt very similar to in the US where like farmers everywhere are just very grounded and down to earth people where they aren't as bogged down or concerned with a lot of the other kind of noise in the world where like it just felt like they wanted to, it just felt like there was a similar connection with this is how I want to treat others and this is how I want others to treat me, and not as much being about class or race or even ethnic group. And I find that to be really similar with the farming community in the US where it's very, it really is like more about um how do you farm, like how do you practice, what like how do you relate to the land, and not as much about like your family background or like who you are. It's just like the farming community is very non-judgmental, and I found that to be the same from what I've read and heard about the farming community in Namibia.
It's too small to not be
You mean
Oh,
like
the country.
not judged. I said in
Oh,
Florida, the
yeah.
farm
Oh,
community is too small.
Oh yeah, I was about to say they definitely used to be judgmental.
Oh, yeah, that's
So,
true.
yeah, so there's
That's a really
that's
good point.
yeah, there's a lot of interesting nuances to that.
Was
It's really tricky.
was
Yeah.
was there ever a person in Africa when you were there though that received you as one of their own?
Hmm.
Did anyone ever give you that feel it or
Well,
say that?
it's it's tricky because the other layer to
Mhm,
land ownership and farming in Namibia is based on and very connected to colonial land theft from the original German settlers.
mm,
And most of the farms located near the capital of Windhoek are white owned. And so most of the I didn't really like visit those, and also like I was kind of confined to like my program schedule.
mm,
But it's fascinating because there's a commercial farm system and then there's a communal farm system.
mhm,
And both of those are very geographically based, and they actually stem directly from apartheid reserve laws, where during apartheid, people within the various ethnic groups were assigned to certain land that they were allowed to live on. And the same thing happened in South Africa. And in Namibia, though, specifically, there would be like a reserve base for people of the Herero group. There'd be a reserve for people of the Nama group. There'd be a reserve for people of the Mara. There'd be a group for Kavango region and Ovambo people. And there was even a group for one of the indigenous minorities, which are the San people. And basically, it was very similar to what is now seen in the US for reservations for Native American people, where they were forced to live in that specific area. And so now all of the communal farming land is based in those same reserves from apartheid for the most part. And there's been a process of land resettlement since independence in Namibia. Um, However, it's very tricky because the political elite and the political party, which has been the same for the last 32 years, they have been able to commandeer the process and have been able to create and like add in nepotism and a lot of corruption into who's allotted land. And so it's very tricky. Um, it's really, really tricky. And so I actually wasn't able to go to the northern region, which is where most of the communal farms are. Um, and so that was something that was like really saddening about my trip, where I really want to go back to be able to visit that region specifically. Because I think that the farms there have a very different relationship with land, and especially like with food security specifically, where
mhm,
with the communal farming, most of the farmers in those regions are subsistence farmers, and
mm,
so they're growing to feed their families and not to sell, which
mm,
is the main difference between the commercial and communal land.
mm.
I'm getting into a lot of semantics,
No, no,
but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um I will say though that to answer your question of has someone really like let me in and
Mhm,
made me feel that way and made me feel welcome. There was actually a person that we visited in South Africa,
mhm,
and she's based in Cape Town,
mm,
and her name is Lucy Campbell, and she was a really amazing person to meet. And I really like it's crazy because we met her like the first week that we were there. We were only in South Africa for 2 weeks, and then I spent the rest of the 3.5 months in Namibia. And so even from that first week of getting to meet her, I thought about her the rest of the semester because she was the first and there was only one other person that we met in Namibia who was an openly queer woman.
mm,
And Lucy Campbell was also just such a radical and revolutionary kind of person to be around, and was constantly questioning and critiquing and picking at like, why are these statues of white men here? Why are these buildings still named after colonizers? And
mm,
was really able to put a name to a face for what the legacy of apartheid looks like in
mm,
South Africa. And she also is an openly lesbian woman,
mhm,
and she also happens to have a um queer safe space garden that she's created in Cape Town with her partner.
Wow. That's beautiful.
And Yeah, she's super cool, and she's someone I really plan to reach out to again so that
Mhm.
I wasn't able to visit her garden, but she immediately was like, "You will always have a space there if you would like to,"
Mm,
and was very welcoming for me, and we were able to, like, connect on queerness and our identities in that way, and
mhm,
immediately was like, "You will always have a space at my garden,"
mm,
and that was, like, something really meaningful for me
mm,
where, like, uh, it was really important it was a really important interaction for me to have at the beginning of the program, um, but yeah, it's something that's also really tricky about my time in, Southern Africa, where the way that queerness is, like, perceived and really shunned in a lot of areas, like, made it feel much less like returning to anything, because
mhm,
to be there and feel like I would not be accepted based on my sexual orientation or feeling like I couldn't
Mhm.
express that openly
mm,
made it feel like I was not returning to a place that I
mhm,
was supposed to be.
mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really real. And what's I guess kind of funny and also yeah, in a funny and ridiculous kind of way is that you're about to be going back.
Going back,
You're about to be
I too.
going back, but you're gonna be in a different place. So
Yeah.
and you're for different reasons and for different length of
Different
time.
length of
So
time.
yeah, would you mind just sharing more of this next upcoming trip that you got to West
Yeah,
Africa and like what you're looking forward to for this one?
yeah. Um, I also wanna add too that, like, I feel like a much different person too
Oh yeah.
after my time
Hmm.
in Namibia, and there's I think it's really made me feel, um, more comfortable and, like, open to nuance and the ways that and, like, contradiction and, um, things that are hard to describe or that you can't quite describe fully, where I think there was so much that I experienced during my time in Namibia that I will probably never be able to put words to,
Hmm.
but know that I felt them while I was there, and know that there's such a rich history and culture and just, like, such a strong presence of really, like, joy in Namibia that could be really easy to take for granted when you learn so much about the colonial history there. Um, and so I just feel like with the region of Southern Africa and then with the greater and larger continent for Africa, where it's like there's so much there that like can't even be fully described. And like I was telling Miles of like there's a so I'll be traveling with Miss Lise Campbell, and she's the founder of the Japo Cultural Institute in Cleveland,
Hmm.
and, we'll also be traveling with her partner, Weedy Brima, who's actually, like, a world-renowned, like, Grammy-nominated djembe drum player.
That's
Oh,
wow.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
he's
fine.
crazy. Yeah, I gotta show you the album. It's so good.
Wait, what was his name?
Weedy Brima.
Oh, okay.
Weedy, yeah.
Yeah.
He's very like, one of the, like, sweetest guys.
Mm,
And, he came to our West African dance class to teach, some patterns, and he said in one of our classes how you can't use, like, the English language to just like, you can't describe African concepts in English vernacular. And, like, just, like, the boundary of language
yeah.
where there was so much that I experienced while there,
Mhm.
I don't even have the word like, I literally don't have the
The
words
English
in the
words.
English
Yeah.
language to describe the amount of culture and experiences and just, like, presence of things that are there,
Mhm.
where so much of it just, like, can't be described in English, and so I think I feel more open to experiencing them when I return, and it will be a different region, and so I'm excited about that to experience some of the because I think the hardest thing too about, um, Namibia and South Africa was that because they were both settler colonies, from the original colonizers,
Mhm.
that meant that white people and white Europeans we're still living there
Yeah.
and have an emotional connection to being there that, like, I was on my flight to Johannesburg and was like, "Where am I going?" Like,
Yeah. It's all over the
it
place.
looked like
Yeah,
a flight
exactly.
to London,
Yeah,
and I was
exactly.
like, "Where
Or flight from
am I on?"
London.
Yeah, from London. I was like, "Am I on the right flight? Am I on the right
Yeah.
plane?"
Yeah, exactly.
And
Whereas, West Africa is more extractive, so
right,
they were never coming in to stay.
they were never coming in
Yeah.
there to live. Exactly. And so I'm really curious to see how that might change the culture there now. Um, and so yes, they are different regions. Um, and that's also something that I'm looking forward to and also centering in how I prepare for the trip and remembering that they're different places and have such a wide variety of what to experience while I'm there.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, just remembering to go into the trip without an expectation or any assumptions for what I'm going to experience or feel so that I can be more open to what does happen. And
Mm.
I'm really excited because we're going to be focusing more on the arts specifically, and it'll be a cultural immersion for the 2 weeks that we're there in Gambia and Senegal. And we fly into Senegal and then bus into Gambia and then bus back to Senegal. And we're going to be taking drum lesson classes and dancing classes. And we'll also be learning Wolof for some of the time that we're there and taking language classes. And so I'm really excited to get to travel with two amazing artists who've been there before and having people to like guide me while I'm there because it would look very different if I weren't traveling with them. And so
Yeah.
I'm really excited for the blessing that it is that I get to travel with them to see West Africa for the first time.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And a lot of our listeners aren't like in college or necessarily on these interesting study abroad programs,
Mm,
but a lot of people still consider or are thinking about traveling to West Africa or
mhm,
to Egypt or, South Africa or something just on their own or with programs like at Urban Intellectuals. Shout out to Freddie, a former podcast guest. But what do you think is what's worth it in going
mm,
to the continent at all for traveling in any capacity?
mm. Yeah. Wow. I mean, really, just everything is
Everything? Yeah.
it's all worth it.
Mm.
Like
Even the harder parts and the
even the
challenges
harder
and
parts,
okay,
of
why?
course,
Why?
because I mean, because you can't have the good parts without the harder parts,
Mm.
and like it's just so unforgettable to be able to experience, like I said, the nuance of being there. Where being in Namibia specifically, they have a they still have a class of people who are referred to as colored or mixed. And so even though I have two black parents, I am lighter skinned, and so most people perceive me as being colored.
Mhm.
And on top of that, I was perceived as a woman, and so like I was constantly like having to navigate the patriarchy there and the prevalence of unwanted comments from men and navigating that. And then on top of that, I mentioned of like the feeling and like kind of judgment around queerness, where
Mhm.
it just felt like I was constantly having to navigate what, like how people in Namibia were perceiving me, or having to navigate like what not to do in certain situations for
Yeah,
sure.
right.
But like if I hadn't, I know like I wouldn't trade any of that for having been there. And I think it really is something that for it to not be on someone's list for places to travel, it's just like, why don't you wanna go there? Like, it
Anti-black, yeah.
yeah, it's just anti-black. It's just anti-black. And so it's like
Just cheating yourself,
so I think, and I don't want to like be telling people like what to do, but I think that if I think traveling to anywhere in Africa is definitely something everyone should experience globally, just
Mhm,
globally,
mhm.
because
Like, you mean like whether you're black or not?
whether you're black or not, whether you're in America or not,
Yeah.
just globally,
Mhm.
everyone not living in Africa needs to go to Africa. Like, just like globally, if you're not living in Africa, you need to go
Yeah.
because everything that you use comes from there.
Yeah. That's so
Like,
that's so true.
maybe it's made in China, but so many, so many resources
Yeah.
are taken from Africa, and we just assume that they come from the sky, and it's like, no, actually,
Yeah.
they come from like the center of the earth,
Right. No,
which
I mean,
is like positioned in Africa. So it's
no, the majority of the time that Homo sapiens, human beings, have ever been around, majority of that time was in the continent,
in the
you
continent.
know, before people migrated elsewhere. But sir, I want to circle back to movies real quick because one of the most popular and influential representations of Africa in the Black American imagination is, of course, Black Panther and
For
Wakanda
sure.
Forever. So you don't gotta get into like your full on
Uh,
reviews on the
yeah.
movie if you don't want to, but could you at least share your experience with seeing Wakanda Forever in the
In Namibia.
Or the
It-
first one still.
The first one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Black Panther is very global. Like Black Panther is just, I think, it means a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I will for sure say that. Um, and I think that when it came out, it was a big deal. Like from like most like pretty much every Namibian I would talk to, they're like, "Yo, have you seen Black Panther yet? You
Yeah.
need." And actually, another popular one was when the Woman King came out.
Oh yeah, that movie.
Yeah, that came out when I was there. That came out when I was there.
Yo,
Yeah, and so
you
like
saw that in the theater.
I actually didn't see it in yeah, I didn't see it in the
That would
theater.
have been the one to see.
Yeah, I know.
first.
I know. I really should have seen it. I know I didn't get to see it, but that was another movie where everyone like I'd be talking to people that I was working with at my internship, and they'd be like, "Have you seen Woman King yet?" And I'd be like, "No, I haven't yet." And they're like, "It was so good, you have to see it, Vera." And and so yeah, I think it's definitely it's another thing that's very complicated in terms of like just the multi layers that it has. On surface, Black Panther, the first one, especially like is such a beautiful series, and they really do it well in terms of the budget they have. Like they treat it seriously, and you can tell through the costumes, right? And like Ruthie Carter, right? She's the one who did the costumes. Yo,
Crazy
like
costumes.
crazy
Yeah.
costumes, and just the detail of the film is just so beautiful. Where that really needed to happen on screen and
Yeah.
needed to be seen by people.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, though, like I think it brings up a lot of critiques, and I think of it a lot in connection with the Beyonce visual album for Black is King,
Mm.
where I remember hearing like quite a few critiques of like, is this real African culture or is this just Beyonce as an African American
Representing
performing it? And I
artistically.
told you that conversation I had with someone who was in Namibia, and she's from there and has lived there her whole life. And it was like 2 days before I was gonna leave, and it was the first time that I'd had a conversation with a Namibian about what they thought about Black Americans,
Mm.
even though I kept hearing about it and I was traveling with all white Americans, and so I would hear about it from them where they're like, "I have people asking me, 'What are African Americans like?'" And I'm like, "No one's asked me that." Like, I haven't had
No,
a co
wait.
no one
People
would
were
yeah,
asking.
people would ask, like, the white kids. Yes, people would ask, like, the white Americans in my group.
What are Black people?
Yeah,
They
like
would.
like, tell me, what are Black people really like there?
Yeah.
And then I had never had any conversation. It was 2 days before that I finally talked with, like, a
What?
Namibian woman about her opinion, and she said that she felt that when when African Americans come to Africa, they want to tell they wanna tell people there, like, what they need or, like, "Oh, you're being oppressed, and this is how to limit." But she was like, "But I actually don't see myself as oppressed, and I've never seen myself that way, but you're projecting that onto me because you haven't lived my life." And she was also saying how so often she feels that African Americans try to perform being African, or when they arrive there, it's like a performance of Africanism. I think is how she put it. And that really got me thinking, and that makes me think about with Black Panther, where you have Chadwick Boseman, like, does a hell of a job in his role,
Yeah.
but he's not African.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Angela Bassett does an
Oh,
amazing job in her
incredible.
role. She's incredible, but she's not an African actor. And
Right.
so, like, I think in terms of
They all had to learn
representation, they had
accents
to learn the
and
accents,
exactly.
and same with Viola Davis for Woman King. And these are incredible, incredible actors. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form wanting to critique their skills or
The work they put
the
in.
work that they put in, or the fact that they also deserve to be there. But I think that this comes back to what I was saying of the relationship between African American students and African students at Oberlin, where, like, these are the conversations I want to be having with African actors and with African American actors in terms of, like, okay, like, forget white people for a second, forget the Martin Freemans of the movie. Like, what are we gonna, like, how do we want to approach this? And, like, how do we want to make this the most authentic film it can be? And yeah, I think that that's something, again, about, like, collaboration, that I think that there's so much in media that tells us that we can't bridge the difference between us, or, like, we'll never be like each other, and so we can't agree on anything, or we can't decide things together. But I feel there's so much more strength in connecting over those differences, and it would be a very powerful connection if there was a genuine and intentional link between people on the continent and then
People in the diaspora.
people in the
Yeah.
diaspora.
And it's kind of what you were saying too about organizing around dreams and desires.
Yeah,
Germany Brown.
exactly, rather than what you hate about the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's funny because it actually kind of connects. I know it's a different, like, group, but it kind of connects to my opinion of Wakanda Forever, the sequel, because obviously the people of Talokan would have been a much better ally, and yet they turned them into the villain. And I was like, no, this is not how this was supposed to go. The United States is the obvious villain of this film. I know. And then I was like, okay, really?
Yeah.
Like, the United States and France are the ones trying to take the vibranium, like, trying to take the resources and extract it, just like in the real world. And then you have, like, the two, like, POC groups in the movie, like, fighting over it.
Right.
And I was like, okay, like, this is all orchestrated by Marvel.
Facts. And if he's like 300 years old, he would be really wise if he hasn't
He
gone
was
to war.
wise.
Exactly. But if he hasn't gone to the war with the surface world in that amount of time, and then now he does, it makes him seem like unintelligent. Like that, like
It was
Because
kind
they-
of reckless.
Yeah,
It's like he was trying to
like kill Riri. It's like,
Yeah.
no, you don't have to. Bro. Like just
They don't.
yeah, it's like he's
not necessary,
makes
bro.
them seem like a dumb villain. I mean, but
Yeah.
they never lost. You know,
Yeah, that was
They
cool at the
won
end.
second.
They wanted to.
That was cool at the end, yeah, and it seemed like they were gonna create an allyship. I just think that could have happened, like, an hour and a half earlier, and then, like, could have avoided
Yeah,
all those
That's
people
funny.
falling off the ship and, like,
know, that was
getting
tough.
stabbed. Like,
It's like
it was so sad. That scene was
Angela
so
Bassett dying
that
too,
scene
like
was so sad. Like,
yeah.
the whole last half of the movie was just Wakandans and then the Talokan people fighting each other. And I was like, okay, look at how this looks. Like, just the representation of this. And I read a really good critique on Twitter of how, like, they also treated the language of the Talokan people in the film as being like this, like, dead language, but it's actually like something that's still spoken. And you can, like,
Oh,
that's
really?
yeah,
Wait,
I'm pretty
it
sure.
wasn't Spanish.
No, it's not Spanish. It's like
Okay.
it's like an indigenous I'm trying to think if it's Mayan or Aztec. But yes, it's one of the indigenous languages of Mexico,
Yeah.
like
That's wild.
at the time of colonialism, and it's actually, like, spoken by many people still, but, like, it's treated in the film, it makes it seem like it's this dead language that doesn't exist anymore. And that was another thing that I could feel just of watching the movie, where I was like, okay, why are they treating it this way? Why are they treating Peloton in this way? Um, Similar to just like how a lot, and now that Marvel's owned by Disney, just the way that they'll kind of just create cultures into a very like vague version of what it is, where it's
Mhm.
not really focusing on the details of that culture.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Even though Peloton is fictional, but the language is not.
Mhm.
Mm.
From what
The
I understand.
backstory, the
Yeah.
essence, right?
The
Like
backstory was, yeah, that was some
the
real stuff.
the literal people,
Yeah.
you know, like yeah, there's so much.
That was intense.
There's
He
so
said
much nuance
Cortez.
there.
Yeah, he said like remember he
Oh
was like
yeah.
talking about the backstory.
Now that
He's
priest
like when
is
Cortez came, and I was like,
yeah, that's real. Yeah, I had a couple more things that I want to bring
yeah,
up. So you know, you brought up poetry is not a luxury.
yeah,
From Audre Lorde. Eve Ewing actually has
that tattoo.
that tattoo
I
of
love that
poetry is
tattoo.
not a luxury. It's one of the coolest tattoos.
So cool.
And you've also, maybe this is like news. I don't want to break this on air or anything, but you also are thinking about getting a tattoo of the bell hooks like cover with the butterflies.
Yeah,
And I think that was the most excited I've ever felt about a tattoo.
yeah, you
Honestly,
hype.
I was really hyped, and I just wanted to raise bell hooks as someone who
Mm,
we all very much like care about and are constantly learning from. But I just wanted to get your take on your relationship with her.
wow. Mm, mm, yeah. I mean, she passed away about what day?
Almost a year ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's. I think it was the 15th.
it was. Yeah.
So yeah, it was about 14 days from now would be a
Mhm.
year. Um, and yeah, she really, she really was. She just meant everything to me in terms of like, and we haven't touched on this yet, but I really view myself as someone who wants to um work in education
Mhm.
and wants to become an educator, and seeing the way that she never had to compromise teaching and publishing or writing and was just constant and saw them as one and the same, where it just really felt like she embodied that and embodied breaking boundaries between aspects of our lives,
Mm.
um, or compartmentalizing, like, "Oh, I'm a writer now. Oh, I'm a teacher now. Oh, I'm a public speaker now," and was like, "No, these are all me," and wrote from that place, especially from how you can read and hear her critique, and her writing is just so clear and really, really accessible, and it's really she writes it intentionally that way, and accessibility is one of the most important things to me
Mhm.
in terms of, like, why am I writing something if people can't understand it or, like, if people can't read it? And it's a big reason why, oral history is a central part of my research project, and knowing that, like, not everything that has value, like, has to be written down, and the way that, like, speaking is oftentimes more accessible for people,
Mm.
and, think of people like pop like our grandfather on
Mhm.
our dad's side where he did not know how to read,
Mhm.
but, like, he would be able to understand me when I read aloud my birthday cards that I wrote for him. Like,
Mhm.
he knew what I was saying even if he couldn't read it,
Mm.
and so accessibility is really, really important to me, and bell hooks, since she was a writer, like, also seems to take that seriously, and so once I read, I'm trying to think the first thing I read by her. It was probably Ain't I a Woman,
Mhm.
and after that, I was just like, I just wanted to read everything that she had written, and I'm
Have you
still
yet?
no, I
Oh
have
yeah, I was
not.
about to say it's a
I'm
lot.
still, yeah, I'm still going down that list. No, I like starting with her essays, though.
Yeah.
Essays are another accessible thing for me to read where I don't feel overwhelmed.
Mhm.
Like I mentioned earlier with, like, sometimes reading feeling intimidating or overwhelming.
Mhm.
Um, And so essays, and her essays specifically, are a really nice place for me to start, and were really inspiring for me to think about, again, like, world building and thinking about the world that I wanna see and I wanna live in, and that I want my kids to live in, that I want us to live in, and not just accepting reality for what it is now. And so she's someone who just really motivated me to not be afraid to think critically and to, like, own that part of myself and not shy away from it.
Yeah, that's really real. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and you're right about her clarity. Like, it's funny because I had read a lot of her work before I ever heard her actually speak. And
Mm.
and like hearing her speak for the first time is so funny because she got that energy,
Yeah.
and like she literally sounds exactly like how you would think she would sound off of her writing. Like it's the exact same like tone and energy and like voice, you know. And so
Yeah.
I feel really blessed to just like, you know, because it was watching documentaries like Marlon Riggs one, Black is Black
Mhm.
Ain't.
Yeah.
Um, you know, DJ Lene has like a great like bell hook set. Seeing some of her YouTube videos and lectures and stuff, like, because now whenever I read her, I just always hear her
Hear her.
voice, you know, and her
Yeah.
energy is just infectious.
I wanna add in too, I think that's some of the best writers, and because the other
Yeah,
person who does that is James Baldwin.
yeah, for sure,
James
exactly,
Baldwin's interviews, he
exactly.
sounds exactly like the way he
He
writes.
writes, yeah,
And I think it's high key a Black thing, I think, just because of
Mhm.
what I was saying too, of the way that it's developed, it's
yeah,
very based around the oral tradition
yeah,
and how a word sounds and how the sentence sounds, and especially just for how to, like, teach English to someone.
hmm,
And so I think it's definitely something there of, like, connection to language and not taking it for granted, where, like, it's very connected to, like, I'm gonna write the way I talk,
yeah,
Mm.
and I'm gonna talk the way I write,
hmm,
and how those are connected.
yeah.
Mm.
No, no, you're definitely right. You're right. Um,
Oh, I also
something
want
else.
oh, yeah, I
Oh,
was gonna say
good.
too,
Yeah,
of, like, I think that they're I just wanna say too, like,
yeah,
to finish the thought of, I think that they're connected because with the poetry is not a luxury thing, right?
right.
Going back to that of how the original poets are often coined as, like, the Romantic era, where they're very
Yeah,
pompous, very elegant, very
yeah,
elevated, entitled kind of vocabulary that's comes off as inaccessible,
right.
and I think that what?
Oh, no.
Oh, you just didn't say white in that, but like no,
Oh,
like,
yes.
like every single
The
word that you
white the
said,
white
it was
way of
like
writing.
white.
The white way of writing.
Speak English. You know, that's definitely a stereotype. There's some interesting stuff there, but yeah, yeah,
No, but just of, like, the way of commodifying your words
yeah.
rather than meaning what you say,
Hmm.
and I think that is a very Black thing to be like, "No, this is how I see this. This is how I
Yeah,
feel about this.
yeah,
I'm
for
not
sure.
going to sugarcoat it or dance around what I'm trying to say
Yeah,
and, like, or make
right,
it sound pretty."
right.
And it's so very, like, grounded and raw and real, and I think that bell hooks and James Baldwin connect in that way,
Hmm.
and Toni Morrison also very much
Oh,
so in
for
her
sure. Yeah,
interviews.
for sure, for sure. Another thing I wanted to loop back to, one of the first things you said was just how you felt like you were a slow reader. And that actually puts you in the best company because Jacqueline Woodson, another former guest of ours, uh, is proudly the slowest reader on earth, right? And she talks about the importance of reading slowly. Um, and one of her books, her memoir, is written in poetry form, Brown Girl Dreaming.
Yeah,
Um, is, you know, a crucial book for all of us, but you first in a way. And I remember when we found it at
yeah,
the Little Free
yeah,
Library
Little
walking
Free
around
Library.
Dayton. Um, but I wanted to ask along what you were just saying from your last answer, like what are you dreaming about right now
Wow.
specifically?
Wow. Whoa. What am I dreaming about? Wow, that's a really good question, yo. Feel like in my head, I'm thinking of all of the most basic things that
Yeah,
people
yeah,
need: clean water and
yeah.
fresh food.
Mm.
Um, but I'm trying to think deeper than those things.
Those are super deep.
They are deep.
Yeah.
They are deep.
Of
Hood
avoiding
feminism,
climate
you know what I'm saying?
because
I mean, that's true. That's true.
you
I
were like
mean,
the other day you were like, we got 8 years, bro. I was like, right, what?
yeah, we were in the car. I know.
Oh, off of the report.
Off of the report.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Is that
Mm.
recent?
R.I.P. Yes, yes,
Oh.
yeah. Well, yeah,
2015, probably.
but then there was also like the more recent one that came out,
Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
which was like even more like
Yeah.
Climate
get it together. Yeah,
catastrophe.
exactly. Get it
I
together.
mean, it is definitely connected to the climate crisis. Um, and I think something I'm dreaming about that is more of a more recent thing for me, at least like within the last few years, where, my discipline, I'm a Africana studies major. And so, and I think that through high school and, from things that our dad would talk about with like historically, where he's very centered around the African American experience in the US
Mhm.
and very focused around Black people. And so thinking back to like my upbringing, I've really had to reflect on what I envision for the future. And I do believe in like Black communities being led by Black people within that space. But I also have been really reflecting and wanting to dream beyond and look towards solidarity between Black people in the United States and Indigenous people and Native Americans. And also connecting to what I said of connecting with people on the continent and with the greater diaspora globally. Like,
Mhm.
it sounds so hard to achieve, but that really is what I'm dreaming of a genuine and grounded and reciprocal relationship between oppressed groups globally, high key. And like, I really envision that. And I don't want to see any more tension between Black people and Indigenous people of who gets this, and fighting over things like that, that I feel like is very present. Where if we were to ask our dad about like, how do you feel about like like land back? How do you feel about land back?
Mhm.
And I really don't think he'd be able to process it because he's so focused on the history of enslavement
Mhm.
and the wrongdoing of that, where he's like, oh no, I need to get mine first. And it's actually like, we need to go deeper than that. And we need to think about how all of us are connected in this and
It's not a
who
non-zero sum.
it's it's not a zero sum.
Yeah.
And that like that's really something I've been dreaming about, that I find it hard to articulate at times because it can be difficult to be a true and genuine ally to people who aren't from your community or who aren't from your racial background.
Mhm.
But like, I really do mean it genuinely, of that's what I dream of most. And additionally to that, um, it's really connected to responding to the climate crisis, where a lot of the people who bear the most danger to climate catastrophe and environmental issues are Black and brown people globally.
Mhm.
And so the moment that we're able to work together and see their fight is our fight and our fight is their fight, like, I think is when the political institutions that decide a lot of the climate response, like, is when that won't matter anymore, because people are understanding, like, that community is more important than all of that, and, like, that combining our efforts and abilities is much more valuable. And I wanted to say also that I think it's connected to, there's this quote that I really love and that has guided me for a long time, and it's by LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, who is a Dakota elder who worked a lot on the Dakota Access Pipeline protests.
Mhm.
And she said that the abuse of women is well known in history and tells you a lot about what is happening to our earth. And I see a strong connection between violence against women and trans people globally with violence against the earth and disregard for the environment. And we don't realize the way that we're connected to the environment and connected to people globally who are more in touch with their gender expressions. And it's so often villainized and so often targeted for especially like trans and non-binary people who are incredibly in touch with who they are, that it threatens others.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up treating us like those, like treating us like the earth in the way that like creating landfills or like just throwing stuff into the water.
Yeah, wastelanding, exploding, extracting. Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's so connected to me where like it's a disregard for life that I really dream of like healing the earth by like healing our relationship to the most marginalized, which I feel are definitely like women, trans people, and non-binary people globally in terms of like gender specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be any of those groups and also be a person of color is also very deeply connected to what it means for like healing the environment and responding to the climate crisis right now, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm dreaming of in a long-winded way.
And what has been bringing you joy?
What has been bringing me joy?
Yeah. In any way.
What has been bringing me joy? It's a really good question.
We get that a lot.
I don't know. I mean, my instinctual answer is definitely dogs. Foster, our dog Foster, and Jan's dog Bo. Like
building those interspecial.
They really bring me joy. Interspecial bonds. I know it's a symbiosine. Like we see ourselves as separate from other living beings through intelligence or innovation, but I think that's also part of the returning to that I'm interested in.
Right, for sure. And talk about meeting needs, right? Like I feel like
needs.
You know, raising Bo taught me so much about communicating my own needs and getting. Oh, you're gonna bring him?
No, but yeah, like dogs really good at like communicating what they need.
Yeah.
But instinctually, I was gonna say like because like when I got really homesick, like I was just so excited to see Foster and like especially like since we like have never had a dog.
Yeah.
And so like I think it's definitely something where it's like even more joyful having one.
Mm-hmm.
And like even in our family, like nobody argues anymore. Like I swear.
Wait, that's how
I swear. Holiday gatherings used to be like, but yeah, now everyone's like,
where's Foster? Or he's like right there. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, you get someone to pay attention to, like Foster was a true character, and then it kind of like takes it away from having to point attention to other people.
I think so. I really think that dogs can really like diffuse situations.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, yeah, they're just like really calming. And there's a reason that like they're really emotionally supportive.
Right.
I'm trying to think of other things bringing me joy.
I mean, that's a great
I know, right? It's a good answer. What is bringing me joy? Wow. It's funny because I've felt much more at peace recently.
Yeah.
And I think it was because of my trip abroad. But it's hard to pinpoint one thing specifically that's making me feel more open to joy.
How do you define joy?
I don't know. In a lot of ways, I kind of think of it as like defiance or being really defiant to the present circumstances or because I think it can be expressed in different ways. And I know it doesn't mean just happiness. And it also means peace. So it's kind of like a defiant peace. Joy.
Yeah. Poetry.
Find peace. No joy, man. No.
Wow. Grace, this has been an incredible conversation.
Blockbuster
Yeah,
episode.
seriously.
Seriously.
You are wonderful and beautiful. And obviously, we've been talking, whole lives. We will
Yeah.
continue to do so.
Right.
But we feel really, truly blessed to be your brothers and to know you in any capacity, but especially being, the big bros.
Big bros.
So we love you so much and
Big bros,
are really
big
grateful
sis.
for that's right.
21.
That's right.
Big sis. We turned 21. Exactly. Yeah. Grown now, you know what I'm saying?
But yeah, no, just thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. Hope you enjoyed yourself. If you had any like last words or recommendations for movies, you mentioned lady portrait of a
Portrait of a Lady on
yeah,
Fire.
portrait of a lady on fire. That could be the title of this episode, low key, because you are definitely on fire,
That's
or it could
funny.
be like in water, flying, whatever
water.
you want. Portrait of an artist, anything. But yeah, any last words or recommendations for movies, books, music, anything that's on your heart right now?
A last monologue.
Last monologue.
Hammer.
Nah, I'm out of monologues. I'm out of monologues. I'm not used to being interviewed. Used to being the interviewer. I'm just trying to think. Who's a poet I recently really liked? I really want to shout out Dinesh Smith.
Oh yeah,
Their
there we
poetry.
go. Yeah,
They're from Columbus too, right?
Maybe Ohio.
No, wait.
I want to say Chicago. Someone look it up.
yeah. I just gave their book to a friend of mine, homie. I've actually given that book to a couple people at this point now.
Their writing is just like on another level.
Oh, Minnesota.
Thank you. Because I followed them on Twitter and their Twitter is so fun. Follow them on Twitter. They're really, really fun. But like they posted like this poem that was just like, it was probably like only like 7 or 8 lines and like just totally took my breath away. And I was like, wow, this is what writing is supposed to feel like, or like what reading is supposed to feel like. And that's my favorite thing about poetry, where it's just like, you're just so on the edge of what life could be, where it just, you're describing and putting into words like what you thought you couldn't. And it's just like each line is an opportunity to like totally take someone's breath away in a way that like prose can sometimes not be as intentional with each sentence. Where there's like filler sentences to like give plot, and you need that for a novel or for a short story. But in poetry, like it's just like every line can be like a different world, and it's just so cool to me. But like that poem specifically, they were writing about Minnesota. I'm trying to remember the title.
That's right. Yeah, the first time I went on to their Twitter, the first thing up was like the scenes from Pieces of Me, the Toni Morrison documentary. And it was specifically the scene where she was like, "Oh yeah, I had fun."
I
was like, "This is hilarious."
I got a whole rabbit hole. Like I found a whole like everywhere I went on my feed, it would be like coming up with like that specific clip of Piece of Me, and all the like famous Black writers and scholars and poets were like,
fun, but it's cool.
Yeah,
That's hilarious.
that's so true.
I was just going to Twitter too.
But yeah, Dinesh Smith is a really, really beautiful writer, and I really admire their writing and work, and they've inspired me a lot with like gender expression as well, and made me feel more comfortable, and then for them to be a poet too, it's just like awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if you think of any other recommendations, I would like to take this time to say I was right. As soon as you get in your bag, Grace, it's very deep.
I was nervous about this. Yeah.
I will say, Grace was saying, Yeah, like I don't know. I just can only do 20, 30 minutes max.
I'm not trying to do work.
And
Yeah, I didn't say that.
to say I proved the both of y'all, I mean, just to say I'm right again. I think it was 2 years ago during COVID, we were talking in our place in
Having a
Haiti,
conversation just like this.
just
I
like
remember,
this.
I remember.
It was longer, and it was more argumentative. I think that
there
was our
longer
vibe
sessions.
back in the
dogs
day.
weren't there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It was
Dogs
Facts.
there, yeah.
And I pushed Mike into the middle of the table, like probably
Both
3
of us.
hours in. You
Oh,
guys were like,
Me and Grace both just shut down. You know?
Yeah.
Stop talking. We were
You're
Like,
like,
what are you doing? Yeah.
I was like, guys, think this is a great combo. We could have a podcast. When that was great. You guys are like, oh, fuck this. I was like,
we were
what?
just like, I'm tired, though.
And,
Talking.
that's
Like,
true.
we can't just talk for 8 hours.
Yeah, but just had to be the annoying.
Yeah, you have to get a little.
second.
Have to get a little
Be right.
communication, you
No,
know?
I know. I know. But yeah, this was literally my favorite episode ever.
Yeah, seriously, this was
You're honestly crazy, Grace.
Thank you so much, y'all. Like,
Yeah.
I really was hesitant to do this.
Mm.
And y'all were setting it up at the beginning, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, here we go. I was like, you got the sweatshirts.
Yeah, it's
Now it's real. But yeah, thank
your
you.
comfort built.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
like,
you.
It doesn't take long. It's not
Yeah.
like jumping into some water, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I tend to pull back from something before I even like tried it, or like assume that it'll be too much for me to do. And that's something I learned a lot in Namibia as well, at the internship I was working at, where, sometimes they would ask me to lead something, lead a group discussion or a community forum. And I'd be like, oh, in my head, I'm like, I can't do that. But they'd be like, no, it'll be fine. And then I would do it, and then it would be okay afterwards.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got a lot more comfortable with just like jumping into something. So thank you. This made me really, really happy.
Yeah,
This podcast episode brought me joy. It really did, though. This really did bring me joy. Thank you. Thank you, bros.
Thank you, Grace. Love you.
Group hug.
There we go.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review and feedback on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And we will catch you in the next episode.